The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 remain among the most significant and controversial events in world history. These bombings by the United States not only brought a sudden and decisive end to World War II but also demonstrated the immense destructive power of nuclear weapons, ushering in a new era of military strategy and international relations. The decisions leading up to the bombings, the events themselves, and their aftermath have been the subject of extensive analysis and debate. The origins of the atomic bombings can be traced back to the intense conflict of World War II, particularly in the Pacific Theater, where the United States and its allies were engaged in a brutal struggle against Imperial Japan. By mid-1945, Japan was on the defensive, with its cities heavily bombarded, its navy largely destroyed, and its economy crippled by a blockade. However, Japanese forces continued to fight tenaciously, and the prospect of a costly and protracted invasion of the Japanese home islands loomed large. Amid this backdrop, the United States had been working on developing an atomic bomb through the highly secretive Manhattan Project. Initiated in 1942, this project brought together some of the greatest scientific minds of the time, including J. Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, and Richard Feynman, to create a new, unprecedentedly powerful weapon. By July 1945, the project had succeeded, and the first atomic bomb was successfully tested in the New Mexico desert. The decision to use atomic bombs against Japan was made by President Harry S. Truman, who had succeeded Franklin D. Roosevelt upon his death in April 1945. Truman and his advisors faced a complex set of considerations. On one hand, there was the desire to bring the war to a swift end and to avoid the massive casualties that an invasion of Japan would likely entail. Estimates of American casualties from such an invasion ranged from hundreds of thousands to millions. On the other hand, there was the ethical and moral question of using a weapon of such unprecedented destructive power. Another factor in the decision was the geopolitical situation. The Soviet Union, an ally in the war against Germany, had agreed to enter the war against Japan and was preparing to invade Japanese-held territories in Manchuria. Demonstrating the power of the atomic bomb was seen as a way to assert U.S. dominance in the post-war order and to counterbalance Soviet influence. On the morning of August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, took off from the island of Tinian, carrying an atomic bomb codenamed Little Boy. At approximately 8:15 a.m. local time, the bomb was dropped over the city of Hiroshima, a major military and industrial center with a population of around 350,000. The bomb detonated at an altitude of about 1,900 feet, unleashing a blinding flash of light, a massive explosion, and a searing wave of heat. The immediate effects were devastating. The blast generated a fireball with temperatures reaching several million degrees Celsius, incinerating everything within a radius of about 1 mile. Buildings were flattened, and a firestorm swept through the city, fueled by the abundant wooden structures. The human toll was staggering. It is estimated that approximately 70,000 people were killed instantly, with tens of thousands more succumbing to injuries and radiation sickness in the days, weeks, and months that followed. By the end of 1945, the death toll in Hiroshima was estimated to be between 90,000 and 166,000. The survivors, known as hibakusha, suffered from long-term health effects, including increased rates of cancer and chronic illness, as well as psychological trauma. 3 days after the bombing of Hiroshima, on August 9, 1945, a second atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. The primary target for this mission had been the city of Kakura, but due to poor visibility, the bomber, Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, diverted to the secondary target, Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., the bomb, codenamed Fat Man, was detonated over the city. Nagasaki, a city of about 263,000 people, was a significant industrial hub, home to major war production factories. The terrain of Nagasaki, with its series of valleys and hills, somewhat limited the extent of the destruction compared to the flatter Hiroshima. Nevertheless, the impact was catastrophic. The bomb exploded with a force equivalent to 21 kilotons of TNT, creating a massive explosion and fires that destroyed much of the city. The immediate death toll in Nagasaki was estimated to be between 40,000 and 75,000 people. As in Hiroshima, many more would die from injuries and radiation sickness in the ensuing months, bringing the total casualties to an estimated 60,000 to 80,000 by the end of 1945. Survivors in Nagasaki also faced long-term health consequences similar to those experienced by the Hibakusha of Hiroshima. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had a profound psychological impact on the Japanese leadership and population. Faced with the unprecedented destruction and the prospect of further atomic attacks, Japan's leaders were compelled to reconsider their stance. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender in a radio broadcast, marking the end of World War II. The formal surrender ceremony took place on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki marked a turning point in history, with far-reaching consequences for international relations, military strategy, and ethical considerations regarding the use of nuclear weapons. The immediate aftermath of the bombings was characterized by widespread devastation, human suffering, and confusion. Both cities lay in ruins, with survivors struggling to find food, water, and medical care amid the chaos. The Japanese government, overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster, sought assistance from the occupying Allied forces, who began arriving in Japan shortly after the surrender. The long-term health effects of radiation exposure became apparent in the months and years following the bombings. Survivors experienced a range of health problems, including acute radiation syndrome, burns, and an increased incidence of cancers, particularly leukemia. The psychological trauma endured by survivors was profound, as they grappled with the loss of loved ones, the destruction of their homes, and the stigma associated with being Hibakusha. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki signaled the dawn of the nuclear age, fundamentally altering the nature of warfare and international relations. The sheer destructive power of atomic bombs demonstrated that future conflicts involving nuclear weapons could result in unprecedented levels of devastation and human suffering. This realization led to the establishment of various international efforts to control and limit the proliferation of nuclear weapons. The United Nations was founded in 1945 with the aim of promoting international cooperation and preventing future conflicts. One of its earliest initiatives was the establishment of the Atomic Energy Commission, tasked with overseeing the peaceful use of atomic energy and preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. The horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki underscored the urgency of these efforts, and the bombings have continued to serve as a powerful reminder of the need for disarmament and nonproliferation. The decision to use atomic bombs against Japan has been the subject of intense ethical and moral debate since 1945. Supporters of the bombings argue that they were necessary to bring a swift end to the war, saving countless lives that would have been lost in a prolonged conflict. They contend that the bombings forced Japan to surrender, avoiding the need for a costly invasion and demonstrating the futility of continued resistance. Critics, however, argue that the use of atomic bombs was unnecessary and disproportionate, amounting to a war crime. They point out that Japan was already on the brink of defeat and that other means, such as a demonstration of the bomb's power or a naval blockade, could have compelled Japan to surrender without the loss of civilian lives. The targeting of populated cities, they argue, was a morally indefensible act that inflicted immense suffering on innocent civilians. The experiences and testimonies of the Hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bombings, have played a crucial role in shaping the collective memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Many Hibakusha have dedicated their lives to sharing their stories and advocating for nuclear disarmament, seeking to ensure that the horrors they endured are never repeated. Memorials and museums in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, such as the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park and the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum, serve as poignant reminders of the bombings and their aftermath. These sites, along with annual commemorations, provide spaces for reflection, education, and dialogue about the consequences of nuclear warfare. The legacy of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki extends beyond the immediate aftermath and the Cold War era. The bombings have had a lasting impact on international relations, military strategy, and efforts to promote peace and disarmament. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki underscored the need for international cooperation to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons and to manage the risks associated with nuclear technology. This realization led to a series of arms control agreements and treaties.